Hey guys, there is a standard fee for reviews here on EBR. It's not meant to be an endorsement, just helps us keep the site running. So let's do this. Hey, what's going on everybody? So I am here on a fairly brisk day. The wind is blowing and it's kind of got that autumn chill in the air. I am checking out a really cool bike called the UNI Moke Classic from a company called Urban Drivestyle. It's a pretty cool bike that kind of fits that I think it's called the mini bike sort of category, with kind of like the open frame, you know, kind of set a little bit more for the kind of like mini moto or dirt bike kind of thing. I don't know, I'm not too familiar with the gasoline side of things, but the new emerging category for the electric bikes is pretty cool. And this is actually one of the older ones that we're checking out here. This particular model is brand new, but the company's been at it for a little bit longer than some of the other ones you may have seen in the States. But let's go ahead and check it out. All right, so as you can see, this is an electric bike that's kind of unusual from a typical bicycle standpoint. It doesn't have a regular seat post tube, it doesn't have a regular size frame. It does share some things in common with the bike, a fair amount, enough that it actually is a bike, but it looks totally different. For the passerby, it kind of looks like a mini bike or a dirt bike. Some people say it looks like a really small motorcycle, and a lot of that has to do with the open frame, the wide tires, and the headlight. Right over here. So that's a pretty big headlight. But let's go ahead and talk about the bike. We'll go from the back of the bike and work our way front, because I've got a wind coming from behind me and I'll kind of obstruct the noise coming from there. This bike has a fairly wide tire. This is a 20-inch diameter and a 4-inch width on the tire, and it is equipped with some kind of off-road knobbies for the tread. You could, if you wanted to, get a bike tire that has a little bit more of a slick surface if you wanted something a little bit thicker for resisting thorns or any kind of punctures that you would get if you're on the road. But as it stands, it's set for kind of like an off-road use. So these tires are a big part of what gives a bike a good feel. Despite the fact that the frame is kind of raised, it actually feels like it has a lower center of gravity, and I think that has to do with the small wheels. You also have the battery weight in the middle, you have the motor weight in the back there, pretty darn low. So with the spokes, these are actually a thicker gauge 12 gauge spoke that's right there on the back of the tire. That's to handle the extra force that's coming from the motor. These are actually an 80 millimeter wide wheel right here that accommodates the 4-inch wide tires. While we're in the back of the bike, we can talk about the cassette. So this is actually a 14 to 28 tooth cassette in the back. Got to check my notes there. And that's, you know, a fairly kind of like an entry-level cassette from Shimano. You know, I'm not gonna lie, it doesn't have a very wide range on the pedaling part, and I'll kind of address that later in a little bit when we talk about the propulsion. Likewise, you have a Shimano Tourney for the derailleur. The Tourney system has come a long way in the last few years. It wasn't as good as it is today, but nonetheless there is a lot better out there from Shimano and other companies as well. So the Tourney is kind of like a basic set of mechanical system that you have here with the cassette, you know, the derailleur, and also up front you have a fairly big chainring. That chainring actually has a tooth count of 52. So 52 teeth on the front chainring up here. So that's pretty darn big. Usually you see a chainring like that on a folding bike when they try to keep the tension level fairly high. The cranks are pretty standard. This is a 170 millimeter crank right there of aluminum alloy, square taper, bottom bracket. But interestingly enough, the bottom bracket is actually part of the electric system. It's marked Bafang on there. It is actually set for pedal assist, but I'll get to that in a minute. One really interesting choice on this bike is they have folding pedals. So obviously this is not a folding bike, and it's not a small bike either. I think the total length is 68 inches. Let me check my note real quick. Yeah, 68 inches of total length from end to end. So I wouldn't call it monstrous, but it's certainly not small. And it looks a lot bigger. It looks more intimidating than it actually is as a vehicle. So if you pull something like this into your office, I find it kind of funny that you pull in this big you know, motorcycle looking thing, and then you can fold in the pedals. So it does shave off like, you know, a good 2 inches or so from either end, so that's kind of nice. But it's a really interesting choice to put on a vehicle that otherwise doesn't have any folding aspect at all. I mean, really, unless you want to start taking it apart. So Continuing on the back end, let's talk a little bit about the brakes. So I actually like the brakes a lot. These are some hydraulic Tektro brakes. So yeah, you have a 180 millimeter rotor in the front, a 160 in the back, and that's actually just fine because on a vehicle, most of the stopping power should occur up in the front because of physics and things like that. So the brakes are actually really good, and in comparison to the cassette, it's really kind of it's really mission specific, I would call it that, because you have a brake level that's pretty good. Like, I like these brakes a lot. They're better than the brakes I have on my personal bike. However, the propulsion for the gearing, that's actually fairly low, so you have a kind of a difference between the two on component level, and I can tell you exactly why when we move up to the front and start talking about the seat. So this seat does not go anywhere. This is a static seat that's up on the top of the bike, and this seat obviously cannot move. It can't change. It's stuck in that position. It doesn't raise up, it doesn't tilt or anything like that. The seat itself is 33 inches off of the ground from end to end, and the width of the thing is about 5.75, so 5 inches and 3/4 from end to end on the width side, and it's 31 inches long from the tip all the way to the back. So that's the measurements of the seat, and I hope you like it because it doesn't change. So this bike, as you can see, is not really, honestly, it's not really made for pedaling, and that's why the component level is the way that it is. This bike is meant for kind of cruising, and especially here in the United States, it's meant for throttling. When you get on that and you twist the throttle, or sorry, tap the throttle right here, the bike gets moving, and it feels a lot better than when you're pedaling it. You can pedal, and they have made provisions so that pedaling it is not an arduous chore, but it's not really the focus. The focus of the bike is to throttle, is to use it like a little dirt bike or a little mini bike, and they've done that very well. That's why you have a cassette system in the back that's not all that hot, and that's why you have pedals that feel a little strange because they have that folding aspect to them. But the brakes are phenomenal. The brakes are great, and that really puts the focus back on the bike for its intended use. That when you use it to throttle, you get some good brakes on there, you feel comfortable with a bike that has plenty of power and that really puts it out, and you can stop yourself just fine. When you have to pedal, you can, and it's not that bad. But that's why you see such a strange combination of mechanical components on the bicycle. So let's go ahead and continue up front with the seat. So I talked about the dimensions of the seat and everything. It's actually pretty darn long. Like I said, 31 inches from end to end, and it has like this gel covered vinyl, I suppose. The seat actually doesn't have a fairly long draw, so I don't know if it's really going to translate, but why don't I go ahead and kind of get on the bike to the level I would be. Even in the lowest position, my knees are fairly bent. I'm trying to mimic how high I would sit on there, so it doesn't get a full leg extension, at least for myself. My pants have a 34-inch inseam, so maybe if you got something fairly shorter, you might actually get a more comfortable stride with your pedaling. However, this seat is really wide, so you probably have to choke up a little bit, maybe put your center of gravity around here in order to get a comfortable seating position so it doesn't rub on your thighs too much. But again, it's really kind of taking the bike outside of what it's intended use for, which is throttling around and having fun. So continuing with the mechanical specifications, I did mention the bottom bracket just a little bit. Have this fairly wide open area in here that you could, if you wanted to, mount like maybe a bag or so. They don't have a specific bag that fits into this space. Perhaps it would come into contact with the chainring, but nonetheless, it's a pretty open area. Right now, I actually do have one accessory up here that I'll talk about in a little bit, and that's actually the foot pegs. So the foot pegs can go in 3 different spots. Right now they have them up in the very front of the bike. They just kind of screw in there, pretty long and wide, so it's nice and secure. But they can go in the front. They can also go down here, and they can be in that position if you have a rider that's riding in the back and they want to put their feet, you know, kind of cross and then platform right there. Also, there is a position here up on the top if you have a smaller rider that is riding in the back. But that's what these are. These are actually foot pegs. So let's go ahead and put that right back in here. I'll talk a little bit about that after I get done with the electric system, because there's some really interesting stuff about this bike that I totally didn't see coming. And I've been riding electric bikes for many years, many different styles and kinds for all sorts of different durations, and I gotta say that this bike really surprised me. It surprised me in a lot of ways. So continuing up to the front, you have a fairly interesting headset in which in the headset it's fairly standard for the frame. It doesn't taper, it's straight, but you do have this system that connects to, I suppose, what you'd call the handlebars. So these connect up to the handlebars, which are actually independent. You can actually unscrew some of these and move the handlebar, just one of them, to be in a different position. That's actually pretty cool if you have some kind of medical constraint in which one hand needs to be in a different position. So that's actually pretty cool, something you can't do with a regular set of handlebars. There actually is a suspension up in here. So it's actually kind of covered right there, and the stanchions aren't terribly big. So it's a 28.8 width on the stanchion for the suspension system. It actually does kick in. Sometimes you see these little kind of covers that make it look like it has a suspension, but in this case it actually does. I wouldn't say it's a stellar suspension, but it works pretty well for what you need on the road. So if you're coming up off of a curb, you probably want to plan for it. You don't want to just jump and dive off of the curb. But if you encounter a pothole, then this is plenty. This is enough for you. And I gotta say that this bike in total weighs 80 pounds the way it is with the battery, and that's a fair amount. So the suspension system, I would say, is adequate for the weight of the bike, and if you're going to be going fast and you get into a pothole, it's perfectly adequate. However, I would not rely on the suspension for a whole lot of adventurous riding. If you want to do large obstacles and some serious downhill, then you'd certainly be on the wrong vehicle, but at least you would look really cool when you're doing it. So on the front, the tires on wheels, nothing special about that. This is a mirrored set from the back. Spokes are a little bit smaller up front because they don't have to handle the torque that's coming from the motor. I talked about the disc being a little bit bigger already. So yeah, another interesting thing, when I was putting this bike together, these sleeves, I suppose, they actually are independent. So when you're putting the bike together, the dropout is not static. You actually have to like angle these two dropouts to be in the right position to accept the axle up front. So interesting thing. It's not really a big deal, but interesting. Up here you do have some cabling that is kind of sheathed up by this wire loom, which is pretty cool. That also runs to the bottom of the bike down there. And we could talk about the controls a little bit. We kind of talked already about the brakes. These handles are fairly standard, maybe like a 3-finger lever, a bell, of course, and the shifter mechanism for the Shimano Tourney back there. So this is like the windowed gear indicator. Nothing too special about that one. It works, you know, it's a very familiar set. The handlebars, like I said, are a little bit independent, in which you can move one over the other. The grips actually are ones that I haven't seen before because they're kind of interesting. They have the locking ring on there, so they're nice and stiff. They're not going to roll around at all, but they have like a slight ergonomic bulge, I would say, in the center of the grip. So it's not a flat grip. It actually has, I don't know if you can see it, maybe I can get over here for a better contrast with the grass, but it actually kind of bulges out just a little bit right there to kind of accept your hand position. So that's kind of neat. So that's the mechanical system from back to front. Let's go ahead and talk about the electric system because there's some interesting stuff about it. We'll get some of the quick stuff out of the way first. This is a tail light that is integrated into the main battery pack, which is kind of neat. It does have a quick disconnect, so if you smash that thing, you can actually replace it fairly easy without having to rewire the whole bike. There is some extra cord length to accommodate a set of accessories. So if you wanted to, there's like an accessory port, I guess you'd call it, on the framework where you can get something that extends out here. And likewise, with this extra space from the slack on the wire, you can actually pull back the rear light. So that's pretty neat. On the electric system, the motor is a Bafang 500 watt, 750 watt peak hub drive, which is pretty cool. It powers pretty well for the size of the vehicle. For something that weighs 80 pounds, you'd want something that's, you know, a little bit bulkier, and this definitely fits the bill. I like it a lot. So that's in the back of the bike, and it's put pretty much all the way back in the rear. In the middle of the bike, well, we'll talk about the battery in a sec because there are some particular things about the battery. In the middle of the bike is the torque-based pedal assist. So this is actually a Bafang torque-based pedal assist system that is, that is designed to work with this controller, which, by the way, the controller is down under here, and also this motor system. So that's pretty neat that it's kind of built in here, and that actually makes pedaling with electric power not that big of a thing. If it were a cadence-based, you'd probably need a fair amount of heft in order to get enough rotations for the pedal assist to kick in. But with the torque-based system, it actually feels pretty good, and I kind of like it. I wouldn't say that I enjoy pedaling the bike over throttle. I like throttle a lot better on this bike, but that does make it more useful. It means that pedaling the bike isn't a huge chore when you have to do it a little bit here or there. So that's kind of neat. Let's talk about the display. So there's a fairly simple button pad up front. You have the power button, and then you got the plus minus for controlling pedal assist, also a throttle. Fairly simple stuff there. Let's talk about the display just a tiny bit. Try to get a good angle here. So it actually lights up when you press and hold the plus button. That will light up pedal assist, or sorry, that'll light up the display. The backlight, you're probably not going to see a whole lot of that because we're in broad daylight, but it also turns on the rear light and the front light. And I gotta say, the front light is pretty bright. It actually uses 4 LEDs inside of that container right there. So of course it's not a monstrous incandescent bulb the way that perhaps a classic motorcycle would be, but it certainly lights up as if it is. So plus and minus on the button pad changes the number of pedal assist from 0 up to 5. That not only controls pedal assist, but it also controls the cap for the throttle. So I'm kind of picking numbers out of a hat, but if you have it on level 3, that might do throttle up to 13. Level 4 might do throttle up to 17 or so, that kind of thing. But unlike other electric bike displays, this one is actually programmed to go down to 0, which is nothing, and then up past 5 all the way to 9. So it goes up to level 9 pedal assist, and that and throttle cap, and that actually does go past 20 miles an hour. I've been able to get this thing up to about 26 miles an hour, full throttle on the flat. So this would be considered, I guess, a class 3 electric bike. Really depends on the laws in your municipality, so I'll leave that to you to try to figure out. But you can actually get into the display settings if you press and hold the plus and minus button. You can change it if you want to be hour or miles per hour. You can change the backlight level. Right now I have it set for level 1, so it's not terribly bright on the backlight, and of course you can change the clock on there. So not a ton of settings to fix. It's fairly bright, but it's also a little bit out of the way because you have a little bit of space up here if you wanted to mount some kind of accessory, and this is kind of tucked away down there, so it's a little bit protected based on the shaping of the handlebar system here. And it looks like it's totally meant to be there. A lot of times when you see an electric bike, it kind of looks like the display is tacked on, and there's really no way around that in most cases. But in this case, it totally looks like it's intended to be there, which is kind of cool. So let me go ahead and show you the front light a little bit. It's pretty darn wide. I want to say that it's like 7.5 inches wide, maybe 8. I don't know. I don't have my ruler with me, but it's got those 4 LEDs. I can kind of see it by looking at it. There's one on the top, bottom, left, right. It's kind of like a little stub that sticks out there. Pretty cool stuff. It's very bright. I would definitely say it's bright. I don't really have a way to count the lumens, especially here in the field, but I can tell you with experience that it's bright. I've ridden this at night several times and I've enjoyed it thoroughly. The battery is kind of different because this is a 48 volt 14 amp hour battery, and it's in a fairly common case. You see a case like this for the batteries that is mounted on the seat post tube. In this case, I guess you could say it's a seat post tube, but the big thing is that in those cases, it has a handle right here so you can pull it up and out. But how are you going to do that when there's a seat in the way, you may ask? So let me show you. The seat actually has a little pin down here. In this case, I put like a little tiny carabiner that I had at home. You know that drawer in your house that has like batteries and half-used pencils and stuff like that? I pulled this out of here. This is just a simple little carabiner that obviously isn't going to do much climbing for anyone bigger than a squirrel. But this little carabiner I put inside of this little hole right here because this little hole is retaining the seat into position because it actually hinges on this little spot here and will slide up. So that's how you access the battery, is by sliding the seat, or sorry, not sliding, lifting the seat up out of position. And like I said, this part kind of goes beneath that little rail, and then you can put the carabiner on there or something. It does come with a pin, so you can bolt it down so it stays in position, but that makes it, well, I don't want to say difficult, makes it impossible. So long as you have this thing on there, it's going to make it impossible to get into the battery if you want to take it on and off, which I would definitely recommend doing when you're charging the battery if you live in a place where the temperatures fall below 40 degrees or above 110, either overnight or during the day. Anyways, so the seat's up out of the way, and now you can get the battery out. Right now it's actually in the on position, so you would have to rotate the key all the way into unlock, and you would have to take the keys and pull them out, because otherwise the keys will just get rammed in there. So in this position, it's ready to come out. Just pull it straight up out, and then shabams, there you go. There is your battery case. This battery case, like I said, is fairly common. I have seen it before a few times. That's actually a pretty cool thing, because if you wanted to get this battery rebuilt after a few years of use or so, well, it probably lasts you longer than that, but if for some reason you wanted to get the batteries rebuilt, it's a fairly common case, so you could probably find something that could accommodate that without too much trouble. It's not a super proprietary system. So let's go ahead and grab our carabiner. We'll put the seat back down, we'll latch it into position. I don't really know if this is entirely necessary, but it certainly makes me feel better to have that little clip in there. It's kind of tight tolerance. There we go. Oh yes, and we will turn on the key again. So again, this is just an unlocked position. Put it back in there. We're now actually in off, and when you have it completely vertical, now you are in ignition mode. The keys actually do have to stay on the bike the whole time while you're riding it. You can't put it into on position and then pull the key out. Let's go ahead and ride the bike. I'm really excited for that part. And while we're on the bike, I'll tell you about some of the cool things that really impressed me about this bike, and hopefully you'll kind of see that as well. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump on. So here we go. We're on a fairly bumpy part because we're out in this big field that has been recently aerated, it would seem. And yeah, I'm pedaling along with the bike, and that's engaging the pedal assist fairly predictably, I would say. I gotta say, the lower center of gravity in these tires really make it a lot more fun to ride off-road. But for the sake of the video, I can't talk too much. Wow. Let's go ahead and try to throttle and pedal up the hill. Oh yes, so much fun. I want to get in there somehow. But, so, oh, perfect. A little spot. Great, little escape route. Like I was saying, the torque-based pedal assist is actually pretty cool, because it's fairly common for me to just keep throttling on and having a blast with the bike, taking it somewhere, and then I might come up to a stop sign. And when I come up to a stop sign, I forget that I'm in a fairly difficult gear and I need a little bit of push to get me going. Using that torque-based pedal assist, kind of putting a little bit of stress onto the pedals, will excite the electric system pretty quickly. Not as quick as throttle, but if for some reason throttles are not permitted in your municipality, then the pedal assist is actually fairly good. Like, I would say it's acceptable, which is not an easy feat when you have such a unique vehicle. This thing is definitely unique, and it's definitely not following the same convention as a typical bicycle, especially with the seat height and things like that. So having a pedal assist that I would say as a reviewer is acceptable, that's a pretty good feat in and of itself. With a bike that's not really meant for pedaling. It's fairly stable, but you know, when you have the tires set up for a fairly high pressure, then the crown of the tire kind of gives you a little bit of an interesting feeling when you're turning. It's nothing that different. If you're used to riding on fat tire bikes or motorcycles, you probably wouldn't even notice. But if you're used to riding on fairly thin tires, then it takes a little bit to get used to. Oh yeah. I wouldn't say it's easy to control from the seat. This is a really weird thing that honestly probably isn't going to come up a whole lot. Looks like this is a fun place to be. But with some bikes, you can actually kind of steer them with your seat. You can take your hands off the pedal and kind of steer a little bit with the inside of your hips or so. But not really as applicable because the seat is so different. But anyways, that's just a weird thing that you probably hardly ever do. But it's something like me. I do that. Mostly just to see if a bike is fairly balanced. Anyways, kind of getting aside for myself. Let's go ahead and excite the throttle a little bit. kind of show you what this bike does the best. Wah! So it is a little dirt bike. And with those fat tires, you can still do some fun stuff in here. There's that suspension kicking in. So like I said, the suspension is great for the kind of vehicle that you're on and for the kind of riding that you're going to be doing. I wouldn't, you know, push it too much, but it's there when you need it, which is exactly what you want. So I like that part of it. Oh yes. Awesome. I should mention that the bike does have an electric cutoff with the brakes. So you might have seen me manipulating that when I'm riding around, in which I'll keep my thumb down on full throttle while we're going, and I'll use the brakes, of course, to stop the bicycle, but also just to engage a tiny bit, or to, sorry, disengage the motor just a tiny bit. So that's kind of a fun thing to do with a bike of this style, is kind of using the brakes as a reverse throttle, if that makes sense. It doesn't make the bike go backwards by any means, but I think you know what I mean. I want to tell you about why this bike surprised me, and then we'll go ahead and change the perspective and we'll wrap this up. So this bike showed up, and in a very big box, I should say. It was mostly assembled, but nonetheless it was very big. It's bigger than a lot of electric bike boxes, especially, but the bike itself is bigger than a lot of bicycles that I've done. And also it's so unique. This bike, as I said, is a very different style. It's like that emerging mini bike style. And I kind of saw it, I'm not gonna lie, I saw it and I was like, oh my gosh, look at this big cumbersome thing, and it's like super trendy, you know, and I was like, oh, this is probably gonna, it's probably gonna feel really strange, it's probably going to be difficult. I'm like, oh, it's gonna be a real challenge for me to, it's gonna be a real challenge to kind of go through this review. But I was pleasantly surprised. I was wrong. This bike has really, and it sounds like I'm totally doing a pitch for this bike, which I'm not. At least I don't want to. If you like this bike, if it fits your needs, then that's great. But this bike has one super secret power that I did not see coming, and that is actually the capability of cargo, particularly with Sweet Pea. So Sweet Pea is my little daughter. She's 3 years old right now, and she goes bonkers for this thing, I gotta tell you, and it has really changed my outlook on this, as well as kind of like the mini bike platform. So she actually sits on the front with me right here. She puts her feet on those little pegs right down there, and she can reach the pegs. She's tall enough for that. She puts her hands right here. Sometimes she puts her hands in my gloves when I'm riding, and I gotta say, she loves it. She goes crazy for it. She begs for it. We hang it over her head, so she's a good girl all day long, so she can go out on a ride with daddy. And we've gone out on this thing several times for up to an hour, just riding the bike, not really going anywhere in particular, but she just loves the adventure side of it. And I gotta say, it's a lot of fun. It is so much fun, and I never would have thought of that, especially when the bike showed up. I really had my own preconceived notions that were totally broken. So should you get this bike? I have no idea. I don't know if it fits your needs. That's why we have ElectricBikeReview.com with so many different bikes that can possibly fit your lifestyle and what you need. Do I need this bike? I don't know, but I can tell you for one thing, and that's that the roller coaster aspect of just how much fun it is when I'm biking along with my daughter really puts a lot of compelling reason into this bicycle, at least for me and for my life and my needs and everything. So yeah, I did want to tell you about that. Let's go ahead and switch a perspective a little bit, and we'll take it from there. All right guys, so I've got you pointed down at the battery and the bottom bracket here, as well as that big 52 tooth chainring. I got it cranked up to level 9 pedal assist all the way. We'll go ahead and take it up this little pedestrian walkway over the highway here and show you what it does. Okay, I think that about does it. Fun stuff. All right, guys, thanks for checking out the review of the UNI Moke Classic from Urban Drivestyle. It's been a lot of fun so far. I'm actually going to make another video talking about some of the accessories and seeing how they work, because Urban Drivestyle is actually sending some of those out, and they want my opinion on them. So I figured I'd share that with you guys. That includes, I think there's a front and a rear rack option, but it does include a couple of options for an extended seat, as well as some other fun stuff as well. So be on the lookout for that video as well. You can check out the written review with all the specifications and measurements for this bike by going to ElectricBikeReview.com. While you're there, you can also participate in the forums for this bike as well as all the many other ones that we've done. So thanks for watching, guys. Ride safe.